closed down. Varun is the the Vice Provost for Student Wellness and the Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life at USC, where I serve as the Humanist Chaplain in a volunteer role there, along with a range of other chaplains, dozens of other world religions represented, and Varun can be more specific about that in a moment. But I just wanted to say before I ask Varun to introduce himself a little bit more, that it's been amazing working with Varun over the last few years, being a person of religion and faith himself, how welcoming he has been to me, and really placed an emphasis on being present and available to secular students on campus, knowing that over 40% of our incoming freshmen each year at USC are people that would mark none on a survey about their religious faith, and really wanting to meet those needs as well. Really, Varun's been a leader in understanding that this is the trend, at least for now, and students have needs regardless of what their faith background or lack of faith background is. So it's been just a joy to work at USC alongside Varun. And Varun, just maybe just take a moment, introduce yourself, and say a little bit about what you've been up to these 10 plus years at USC.
Sure. Thanks so much, Ryan, for having me. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this very important conversation. Ryan, I'm so grateful to you, as always, for your leadership and your inspiration, your wisdom, both on the national level and on our campus. Our students are so lucky to have you in their lives. As Ryan said, I'm the Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life at USC. I am essentially the chaplain for the university. So in that role, I oversee probably more religious and spiritual groups than anyone in the United States. We have almost 100 religious and spiritual groups. We have probably more chaplains than any university in the United States. We have almost 50 chaplains representing every faith tradition. We probably have the only Sikh chaplain in the country, probably the only Baha'i chaplain in the country. Of course, Ryan is our humanist chaplain at USC. And we get to do this work in the heart of Los Angeles, which is the most religiously diverse city really in human history. And on our campus, we got 50,000 students, 11,000 of whom are international students. So that adds a different kind of geo-religious diversity to the work that we get to do. I guess one of the things that I did early on in my time at USC that has sort of shaped the way I do my work is it really stems from the fact that I'm an unusual person to be the chaplain of the university. When I was hired, I was the first Hindu in American history to be the chief religious or spiritual leader of a university. All my colleagues around the country were ordained Protestant ministers, but USC hired me, the non-ordained Hindu attorney. So they were thinking outside the box. There was a lot of hope and change in the air in 2008 that I was the beneficiary of. And so I think I brought an unusual perspective to this role. And part of my perspective was my work and my time living in a Buddhist monastery and studying Buddhism, which shaped me fundamentally. And so when I came as the chaplain, I never thought of the office of religious and spiritual life as a theistic place, because I had seen in my own life how a non-theistic tradition like Buddhism could be so transformative in terms of my own spiritual awakening that when I got to USC, really the first month I got to USC, we made the decision not to orient the office of religious and spiritual life around God, but around meaning and purpose and significance and authenticity and the things that make us human. I think that religion teaches us what it means to be human. Religion is a language and a framework that helps us think about the things that connect us all as human beings. And because we have taken this approach of really trying to be there for all people, all students and faculty staff, wherever they're at in their religious or spiritual journey, whether they're theistic or not, whether they're religious or not. Because we have taken sort of the approach of a human-centric resource that challenges people to ask the big questions in their life, I think we've been much more relevant and much more impactful than we otherwise would have been. Of course, Ryan knows that 45% of our first-year students are not affiliated with religion. I would say probably a much higher percentage of my faculty is not affiliated with religion. So if we were really just a theistic resource, there's no way we could be a university resource. But by focusing on what it means to be human, on the big questions of who am I, what does my life mean, what matters to me, why does it matter to me, how do I translate my values into action, how do I find joy and gratitude and abundance in my life, how do I live a life of my dreams, those are questions that we all wrestle with, theistic or not, international or domestic, undergraduate or graduate, religious or spiritual. We all wrestle with those ultimate human questions because we're all human. And the wrestling with those questions is what's important, I think, especially for 18 to 22-year-olds, because this is such a rich time in their life to ask those questions. So in many ways, I think because of that approach, we could really think about religious and spiritual life in an expansive way. And as Ryan said, part of that means that we have a very active secular student group on campus. They're one of our most active groups on campus. They've grown tremendously over the last few years. They're really there for each other in ways that are life affirming. And in doing so, I think our group, at least since I've been there, has moved from a sort of perspective, I would say, and I'm not saying this pejoratively, but from a sort of atheist perspective, where it was more a critique of religion, to a humanist perspective, which is more an affirmation of what it means to be human, how we do goodness in the world, etc. And so I do think that it's easier to organize people around the things you believe in. And once that shift sort of happened towards an affirmation of a humanist perspective as opposed to an amplification of a religious critique, the group has grown tremendously. And what I found on my campus is what we find in American society, that the most religiously literate people on my campus are probably our secular students, in the way that the most literate people in the United States are atheists, agnostics, and humanists. These are students who have done their homework. They're much more open to different perspectives. They're very engaged in interfaith dialogue. And what's been really interesting, Ryan, and this, is every year now we send atheist and humanist students to divinity school. It doesn't seem like a natural fit to go to seminary if you're an atheist, but our students get to divinity schools. We're sending 4 students to Harvard this year and 2 students to Chicago. They get to divinity school and they write to me and they say, everyone here is like me. I thought I'd be the odd person out, but everyone is like me. So I think it's not just that we're thinking about what secular humanism looks like on a college campus, but I hope that we're empowering students to think about what that looks like in the world when they leave campus, how they can translate what they've learned, how they've grown, what they value into the service of other people.
Yeah, and I think that's going to take a lot of institutional change too in the non-campus based system. So I mean, I think campuses are generally ahead of the curve, creating space, right, for students that want to talk about community and meaning and purpose and values outside of a theistic framework. When those students graduate from divinity school, where do they plug in the non-campus world to then, I don't know, lead communities like that? And we are starting, for the last 5 to 10 years, seen secular humanist communities, and I guess for centuries really, with the American Ethical Union and Society for Humanistic Judaism and some other smaller groups, and more recent groups like Sunday Assembly and Oasis communities. And then, just small meetups, that just pop up in people's living rooms to talk about these things. But there isn't really an institutional framework on the scale that we would think of, like a religious framework, for graduates with that kind of training. Do you see something on the horizon, that where do those students with master's degrees plug in?
That's a great question. I think that's no longer just a secular humanist question.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I think so many of our students who are graduating from divinity school are also going to struggle with very similar challenges. The reality is we're going to lose a lot of churches, and COVID is only going to accelerate the loss of those churches. We're going to lose 75% of Protestant churches in the United States in the next 20 years. So we're going to lose 200,000 churches in the next 20 years. Our students who are preparing for ministry in other faith traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Sikhism, they're also not institutional sort of obvious institutional entry points into that kind of work. There is really no tradition of Hindu chaplaincy in the United States. It's emerging, it's, being a Muslim chaplain is a fairly new and emergent field too. And so I don't think it's just a secular humanist challenge of the post divinity school question. I think it's a challenge for all divinity school students as the demographics and realities of the American religious landscape change so dramatically in front of, before our very eyes. Where I think humanist students have an advantage is that they are going into a secular world, into a secular country, into a secular democracy. And the kinds of things that secular humanists are leading on, human healthy relationships, uh, questions of meaning and purpose, issues of thriving and flourishing, emotional intelligence, self-care, positive psychology, social activism, like those are domains that exist in American life and that need leaders. So it might not be the case that secular humanist leaders go out to lead secular humanist communities that are oriented around secular humanist ideas, but it could be the case that secular humanist leaders go out and lead organizations in a secular society that need to reinvest in emotional intelligence, healthy relationships, meaning and purpose, etc. If COVID has shown us anything, it's that we now have a little time to think about the big questions in our life. And I think people are going to bring that out of COVID into their workplaces too. And we already saw before COVID that we were suffering across the country with an epidemic of stress and burnout and anxiety, not just in college and high schools and colleges, but also in the workplace. And so I do think that all divinity school graduates have to be creative in how they translate their training into a different religious America. But secular students may actually have an advantage because they're not limited by having to go into a particular denominational framework. They're entering a largely secular society with a number of secular institutions. So how does my secular humanist training help me be a better partner at a law firm? How does my secular humanist training help me be a better artist or entrepreneur? How does my secular humanist training help me be a better nonprofit organizer for, homeless issues or other issues that I care about? I think that's where the value add is going to be. And I also think that there's going to be some aspect of secular humanism that can translate into the new sort of wellness industry. So much of wellness or well-being, whether it's in corporations or institutes of higher education, are focused on themes that secular humanists are regularly engaged with, that secular humanists are very literate in, and in many ways secular humanists are the experts in. And those are the issues of connection, community, flourishing, self-care, values, ethics, etc. And so it might be the case that actually secular humanists coming out of divinity school have more opportunities now in a increasingly secular world, an increasingly non-denominational world, or country at least, than theistic students.
So, when I was thinking about this conversation with you, I, of course, thinking about the context that we're in. We're, as of tomorrow, at least 60 days, exactly into the stay-at-home orders that happened in California early. So 60 days for us, working from home at the Secular Student Alliance. And not long after that, USC closed down, and on spring break, everyone went home and was told to stay home. So I'm wondering, and we've talked about this in our religious directors meetings and various other contexts, but what has this pandemic done to your efforts and other efforts to create community, whether it's on a campus or not? Like some of the folks on the call today are part of communities that meet in person, and that's the bread and butter of what they do. And here at the Secular Student Alliance, our bread and butter has been until now organizing groups of students on campus in small groups together, face to face. And it's really upended those efforts. Like, how do you see going through this? I don't know how long it's going to take. It could be another year before we're fully out of the woods with the vaccine and so forth. How has that affected your organizing work, and what kind of trends or patterns are you seeing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We had to do two things when USC decided that we weren't going to come home from spring break. We had to think about how to move our curriculum online, and there was some precedent for that. We do have a lot of online students anyway. 8,000 students already have online degrees. We have the technology, the tools. So it was a difficult transition, but there was a template for what online learning looks like already at a university. There was no template for what an online community would look like at a residential university. And in some ways, when you can't be in residence at a residential university, it's almost like an existential crisis. That's actually so much of what we do, and at least at the undergraduate level, is outside the classroom but in person. You know, the things that transform students at residential colleges aren't things that are happening in the classroom. It's what's happening in the dorms, it's study abroad, it's recreational sports, it's fraternities and sororities, it's spiritual life and community service, it's student journalism, etc. And so we lose a lot of that when we're not in person. What we have seen is that in the last month or two, since we've gone into lockdown, we've had a tremendous explosion of interest in our online wellness and spiritual resources. It just boomed. We can't keep up with the demand. We have a record number of people taking our mindfulness classes, 4x the number of people that would have taken them if we weren't in COVID. We have like 12 or 1,300 people right now taking mindfulness classes online. We had record numbers of people show up at Holy Week celebrations, Easter celebrations, Passover, Seders, Iftars, etc., yoga classes. So there's a lot where, and in my conversations with people, clerics in Los Angeles, imams, priests, pundits, rabbis, etc., they tell me that their services are much better attended online than they ever were in person, and that people from all over the world are tuning in. So we see the need for connection and community. People are desperate for it, and the only way that we can really provide it right now is through an online portal because of social distancing. But I do fear that there's a limit to this. I wonder what the shelf life is. I am already Zoom fatigued after 60 days. I can't imagine that at some point other people won't feel that as well. And so we will see soon the limits of being an online community. And I think what we will learn from this is that there are some things that we can and should be doing online. You know, it's been so much more effective to do meetings online. I'm way more in touch and connected to my staff than I've ever been. You know, instead of meeting once a week or once a month, we're meeting every day. It's easier to bring people together than it's ever been. You know, in-person meetings that would have taken 5 months to schedule, we can do in one day. So there are certain processes that we will find should be online, should remain online, etc. But then there are things we will realize that shouldn't be online, can't be online. Those are, you know, excuse my terminology here, those are sacred things. And those are things that we really need to fully embrace when we get back out of it. And so much of the work that we do, Ryan, around spiritual care, pastoral counseling, community formation, meaning making, is done in person. And while being online is better than not having any resource, and while doing Zoom calls is better than not doing calls at all, I think there are limits. So we will see how this all plays out in the fall when colleges come back, and there'll be a whole variety of ways in which colleges come back. It's unclear, but some may be fully residential, some may be fully online. My sense is that most will be some sort of hybrid of online and residential. We're going to see what it means to do co-curricular, extracurricular stuff in the community formation space when people aren't actually in person with each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like even before all this happened, the previous semester, you know, it's hard. It's funny how our perspective changes so quickly, but it was only a few months ago in the previous semester that we had such a series of horrible crises on campus around mental health and student wellness and student deaths. And we were talking already at such a high level of, I don't mean high level in terms of administration, but just an intense level about, you know, what are the causes of loneliness and depression and despair among students, but not just students, right? Among all of us. Is it something societal? Is it something related to social media? And I haven't had a chance to ask you this question, you know, offline, but how has USC managed to stay in touch with students around their personal wellness while they're away at home? Have they checked in and chatted with you? And have you seen an increase in student sort of despair or anxiety, or has it been kind of like static?
Yeah. So students have checked in with me, and I'm actually doing more work with students than I've done in many years. I mean, every day I'm on the phone or on Zoom with students who are in distress, are in crisis. So the good news is students know how to reach out and find us. The challenge is that we lose a lot of the gatekeepers for students who might not reach out on their own. When they're on campus and they're in crisis, we have gatekeepers. We have people in residence halls. We have professors in classrooms. We have academic advisors. We have roommates. All of those people are bystanders who intervene early and let us know when they are concerned about someone in crisis. My concern is that without those intimate gatekeepers, students can fall off our radar in a way that would have been much harder if they were on campus. And so that's my concern. You know, we're a big campus. We got 50,000 kids. We're a city within a city. So the scale of what we deal with at SC is just on a whole different level. So those are my concerns. I think right now what I've seen is that most students are mostly concerned just about the logistical challenges. How do I, you know, a lot of the last 2 months has been, how do I get home? You know, what do I do about my room and board? Can I take classes pass fail? How do we do class on Zoom, et cetera, et cetera. There are logistical questions, but tomorrow's our commencement and we're gonna put an end to this year and move into the summer. And I anticipate that the concerns are going to move to more emotional, existential concerns now that we're done with the semester. Now we're going to get the floodgates, I anticipate, of disconnection, loneliness, anxiety, and uncertainty. You know, and so I think that's where we're heading. We know 80% of college students say that COVID has negatively impacted their mental health. 80%, right? The flip side is some students are actually in a better place because they actually have now protective factors around with parents and community. They can thrive at home in a way that they were feeling like they couldn't thrive on campus. So for some students, they might be in a better place. For some students, they might be in a worse place. And for some students, they may be in the same place. But my sense is by the fall, we're gonna start to see uh, a lot of at least low-level mental health challenges across students, faculty, and staff who might have been kind of away from campus for 6 months, even more by the time we get back. And that's what we're trying to think about now. How are we going to encounter what we see in the fall? Because then we'll be past all the logistical questions.
Um, the you know, you mentioned already a little bit that this, you know, the pandemic has created in us some new habits, some that are, you know, things that we maybe didn't see before because we didn't have the eyes to see them, you know, as tools or as resources. Are there specific things that you hope will keep doing once the pandemic physical distancing piece is over? And I guess part of that is also, do you think, like, what do you hope will be different when this is over?
Yeah, that's great. So what I hope is different is that we don't just try to get back to the way things were. I think what this pandemic has shown us is that there are real inequalities in our world. And what higher education at its, I think, in its most aspirational form tries to do is create an equalizer across those inequalities. So even though students come from different backgrounds, histories, perspectives, and realities, when they get to campus, for the most part, they're living in the same dorms, they're eating in the same cafeteria, they're taking the same classes, they're going to the same athletic events or parties, right? So there is a sense of a social equalizer. But when they go back to, now that we're online, we begin to see those disparities. Some of our students are going back to private islands, and some of our students don't even have internet access, right? Some of our students are traveling wherever they want on private planes, and some of our students are undocumented or can't go home because of visa issues or Muslim ban or what have you. So the disparities of the world are amplified in a way that higher education can't be an equalizer. And my hope is that what students see is that we don't need to go back to that world, that maybe we reimagine or rebuild the world that we want to live in. Maybe this is the time to address issues around socioeconomic inequality. If there's ever been a time for us to think about what's our responsibility to our planet right now, this is the time, right? and for students who have largely grown, many of whom have grown up without a religious or even spiritual framework to think about meaning making in the world, without an idea that there might be a reality larger than themselves, suddenly this is a public, I guess I'll use this word, theological moment or ethical moment where all of us are thinking about what is our responsibility to each other or to the planet. The fact that we're telling young people who have a very low chance of of being of dying from COVID not to go out to protect people they don't know is in some ways a ethical moment to ask them to think about what is your responsibility to other people, right? In a way that we might not have challenged students to think about uh, until now. And so I think there is this moment of opportunity to reimagine the world. There is this moment to think about a reality greater than ourselves. There's a moment to think about what our responsibilities are to each other and to the planet. Now, none of these are theistic in nature, even though they might feel religious as impulses. I think these are all human questions that we can all wrestle with. I also think we can have some time for empathy here. You know, Brian, you and I talk about how lonely our students are. That's not what we see. That's what the data tells us. Cigna just did a survey to show us that uh, the loneliest people in the United States right now are 18 to 22-year-olds. Those are our college students. But now we're all feeling kind of lonely, honestly. And the limits of being online, which students have already seen from being the first digitally native generation, now we're all feeling the limits of being online. So I think that as a generation, we can be more empathetic now to what our students are going through because we understand what it's like to be disconnected, what it's like to feel lonely, and what it's like to be entirely online socially. And that's how our students come to us, right? In a way that we probably couldn't fully understand until now. So I think there's going to be empathetic perspectives across generations. I hope there's going to be a public reimagining of who we are and what our world is and what we want our world to be. Um, and my hope is that our students tomorrow who are graduating will feel empowered, not disempowered, but empowered to tell new stories about the world they want to live in.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's tough now, but I think looking back, these students will realize, that they graduated at a hinge point in history. Depending on how we handle this and what we do after this, I think this could be a real pivot point for our society, for better or for worse, again, depending on how we handle it. But they're really living in that pivot moment, going out into either graduate school or perhaps the work world in some format. I think about, so many of the students that I know there are engineering students of one kind or another, or, neuroscience students, and to think about ways of creating a better future, that's what they do, right? That's their sort of their wheelhouse. And then you have, the students that are in philosophy and going into, like you said, into seminary or other sort of advanced liberal arts, where we're asking them to think differently, sort of for us, and then help us think more deliberately about how we want to live. And yeah, so I mean, I think some old-fashioned habits are coming back too. It's not just about, something newfangled, but something old-fangled, like picking up the phone and calling someone that you haven't talked to in a while, um, has new relevance.
Yep.
And,
It's true. I think the tactile too. I think we're going to see the limits of online, and we're going to re-embrace the. I think my prediction is postal is going to make a big comeback. People are going to write letters and postcards. I'm
oh,
spending
that's
my
cool.
days playing puzzles and things that are very tactile because by 5 o'clock we can't look at a screen anymore, right? We're done. And so I think you're right. I think we're going to explore different kinds of ways of being,
Mm.
and those might endure too, in ways that. That maybe being online all the time is really going to empower us to be offline some more when we get out of this.
Yeah, I wonder if the, in-person meaning-making communities, from synagogues to mosques to churches to secular humanist congregations, whether attendance at those things, like people, I kind of asked you ahead of time, like, does absence make the heart grow fonder? Like, will Sunday assembly see like an uptick in attendance, or will, um, philosophical discussion group meetups, see an increase in people once this is over, because they're like, get me out of my house. Let's gather around a pint of beer at the pub, or let's go for a hike, or let's go camping together, or like let's do things together, and have a renewed appreciation for those things, because we haven't been able to do them. I mean, things that we've really taken for granted, like large concerts, not that I ever went to a ton, but I know you did and have, and can I tell everyone what a
Sure, why not?
what a deadhead you are? So
Yeah,
can you imagine like not being able to go to these massive, like these are culture defining moments,
yeah,
when
yeah,
people gather. And now, my girlfriend and I will be watching TV, and we'll see a large gathering on some TV show, and we'll think, oh my God, why are they're standing so close to each other? It's a little unnerving.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know
It is unnerving.
if
Yeah.
you if you think people will
I
sort of jump back into those big events.
yeah. So I think you're right. I think there's two ideas that kind of go hand in hand. One is absence makes the heart go fonder. The other is out of sight, out of mind. Will people forget because it's just out of sight? I don't think so. We are tribal people. We're not wired to be socially isolated. We're wired to be in community. This is against the reason this is hard is because it's not in our DNA to be doing this, right? We are supposed to be in kin, in family, in tribe. That's the way we've always been. That's what it means to be human. And so I don't think that people are going to discount or discourage human connection. But it's going to take us a while before people's consciousnesses come back to a place where they're comfortable. Even if restaurants open tomorrow, are people going to go to restaurants? Even if there's a baseball game tomorrow, are people going to go to the ballpark? Even if the movie theater opens tomorrow, are people going to go to the movies? It's going to take a while before we get to a place where people are comfortable, even if the opportunities are there. What I think is that with two kinds of meaning making communities, we really see a loss, and I think they will rebound strong. One is spiritual and religious communities, and one is sports and music, I guess. For a lot of people, COVID became real when one of two things happened: when the NBA stopped, or when their church or synagogue or spiritual community stopped meeting. Like those kinds of gatherings are so fundamental to what it means to be human, to gather in community with people who have shared values and beliefs, to have a transcendent experience, to reaffirm, our connection with others, to have fortuitous encounters with people we might not know or meet, to be able to make sense of the world with other people. Like those are what religion and sports and concerts help us do. So I do think that that desire will always be there. It might look different in different ways. Maybe it's small groups at first, as opposed to these large gatherings. But it's going to be a while before people's consciousness shifts. I'm surprised how quickly our consciousness shifted to this reality, where if I'm walking down the street and someone else is walking, like almost Pavlovian, I don't even think about it. I just walk on the street. I just move, and so does my 6-year-old. Like we're training her in things that I've always told her not to do. I've always told her, be with your friends, be with your grandparents, be with a community. We live in Venice because it's such a community. And now I'm saying, don't hug your grandmother, don't stand next to your friend, don't go outside. Like I hate saying that to her because that's the consciousness that she's engendering at a very young age, right? And it's antithetical to everything I've taught her. And so what does that mean to have that kind of muscle memory and to get out of it after the trauma? I don't know. But 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 we're beginning to see that people are going stir crazy now. They just opened the beaches in Los Angeles. I think they're going to be packed this weekend. We're going to see that people are going to want to be outside. It might not look like the communities of old. It might look smaller or more intimate, but people are going to want to be together, and that's not going to change. I think people are not going to take for granted the small acts of being together that they used to have. The walk with a friend, the stroll to the store, the ability to go into a restaurant without a reservation. Like those are things we just took for granted. I doubt we'll take those things for granted
Yeah. What do you miss the most, or what are you doing to, I guess maybe a better question is, what are you doing to manage your own personal sort of sanity, I guess, or
anymore.
just kind of clarity? How do you, are you
Yeah.
reading? Are you watching TV? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm doing all of the above. I'm reading a lot. I'm trying to do creative projects. I'm consuming content that I've been putting off. I'm trying to get outside every day, biking or swimming or something. Um, uh, what I have found is that um, having something to look forward to is critically important. So sometimes we'll go on a bike ride, or we'll do a drive-by at my brother's house, or we'll go, we have a friend who has a pool that is empty, the house is empty, so occasionally we'll go to the pool. And just having something to say, oh, at 5 o'clock I get to go here, or I get to go there, even if it's just driving 20 minutes or walking 10 minutes, having something to look forward to has been critically important. And
Hmm.
so that idea of a psychological release, that I can get out of the house, that this isn't my whole world right here, um, has been my salvation.
Hmm.
Even more than the thing itself is the idea of being able to do the thing itself.
Hmm.
Even more than like being on the beach or doing a drive-by at a friend's house, is the idea that, oh, in a few hours I get to go do that, and I look forward to that, and that gives me some excitement in the day. So I think that psychological release or anticipation of something new or different is critically important, and that's why this has been so hard, because it's hard to have to create those kinds of opportunities now.
Yeah, I think that's a really key insight. Really resonates with me. Well, we have some folks with us on the call, and they've been patiently listening. And I wonder if anyone has something they'd like to share or ask or reflect on. If you want to just unmute yourself, and if you care to turn on your camera, that'd be cool. But if no pressure, if you want to ask a question, this would be a great time. If not, I can certainly think of something else.
Well, I was typing this in a question, but I'll actually say it. I liked your idea of how this being a historical moment to reimagine a new society. And what that makes me think about is during this lockdown, how the environment has been so much more improved. Our air quality is so much better. And so there are some good things to be taken. There are good takeaways if we can learn from those takeaways. And so I see a tremendous amount of potential to come out of this with a better understanding of where our responsibility is as a species to move forward together. So I don't know if it's not really a question, it's just a comment.
Hmm.
Thanks,
Yeah, I've
Christine.
often wanted to make that observation and then felt a little guilty about it because I'm like, oh, but people are dying. So, but I totally resonate with it. Like and it's been observed in the media too, right? That the air quality is better and so forth.
The animals are coming out. I'm from a town my family's from a town in Punjab, where it's about 200 miles from the Himalayan foothills. And my grandfather would say when he grew up, he used to see snow-covered mountains, but his kids never saw them. His grandkids never saw. So generations have been hearing about these snow-covered mountains, but no one's ever seen them. And now in India, every night, generations are on their roofs looking at their snow-covered mountains, which they almost feel like they can touch. And for 50 years, they haven't been able to see. So we're seeing that all over the world. We're seeing animals feeling more comfortable to come out, etc. What I'm surprised we haven't heard, and maybe I'm going to get on a soapbox here, and I apologize for that, but what I'm surprised we haven't heard a lot about in this is that every kind of public health or infectious disease or pandemic challenge of my lifetime, whether it's Ebola, HIV, SARS, H1N1, coronavirus, anyone I can think of, are all the results of humans abusing animals. And so if we're going to think about preventative measures in the future, we really should be rethinking what our responsibility is towards animals, and how in many ways, if we had a different approach to the way we treat animals, we might be able to avoid some of the pandemics of the future.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a profound observation, and something I know that many of the secular student fellowship students would certainly resonate with, as they talk a lot about food justice and veganism, vegetarianism, and the way that our food system really creates a lot of inequities and these problems. My friend Chuck asked a question: are there ways where community members can help with student loneliness? So folks that aren't on campus.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we'll figure out ways in the fall when we begin to assess what's happening. But I think there are ways that everyone can help with loneliness, period. If you know a student, call them up. Students, even before this pandemic, I found that students didn't always feel seen. They didn't always feel heard, and they didn't always feel loved. They didn't always feel like they mattered, partly because they were raised in an online social environment where there's just so much noise, and you constantly have to make noise to be seen. And so I imagine that's even harder now for students to feel seen, heard, loved, valued, to feel like they matter. So if you know any students just in your life, call them up. They will appreciate it out of nowhere, just that you're thinking about them. Send them a postcard. My students tell me that they feel so special when they get snail mail because they never do. So send them a postcard, call them up, just a note. I'm thinking about you. I'm here if you want to talk. Students aren't going to reach out probably, but they will be very receptive to you reaching out and very grateful that you're thinking about them. And I think that's what we all have to do. And in some ways that helps us with our own loneliness too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a gift to them, it's also a gift to us.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think about my own kids and just, I maybe I didn't call them as often, but I call them more now and drop them little notes, and we're going to have a pizza party in their front yard where we like keep our distance and all of that. And they live with their mom, so they're in different like viral ecospheres. So Sabine asked a question about religious education and what types of careers you think might emerge that would allow for those careers to be useful, or that education to be useful. And I guess gloss on that, and I don't want to take away. I think this is where Sabine's going. My education, up through my doctorate is in theology and community leadership, right? Church leadership. And it was really difficult for me to find a career after I wasn't a pastor anymore. And partly because I had been a pastor, and I know that is a difference. And maybe there's some, co-educational things happening with these students where they're getting a master's degree in divinity, so to say, but they're, talking about meaning and philosophy, but they're also getting a law degree, or they're also getting a social work degree, or they're also getting, some other type of degree. So like, what kinds of careers can these things plug into, do you think? You talked about it a little bit already, and do you think something new might emerge that would allow for that?
Yeah, listen, I think there's going to be a disruption across professions, right? What does it mean to be anything anymore post-COVID? In some ways, that's terribly daunting for our students, but in other ways, it can be totally empowering, because the students who are thinking about the world 5 years from now, as opposed to the world 5 years ago, are going to be able to enter into industry with a level playing field. You don't have to stand in a 20-year line anymore to get your turn, because everything is so significantly disrupted that you have opportunities to be more entrepreneurial. My sense is that for all people who engage in religious or spiritual training or meaning making, that they're going to have to try to bring that into the professional work that they do outside of that space. It's not just secular students. Our future Christian leaders are going to be doctors and lawyers and entertainers. Our future Jewish leaders are going to be engineers and novelists, and politicians. Our future Muslim leaders, et cetera, et cetera. You're gonna lead from a profession, because all of institutional religion, all of the support structures around it are slowly are changing. 2/3 of divinity schools are about to shut down because they can't enroll enough students. 2/3. If you're not affiliated with a major research university like a Harvard or a Chicago or Yale, then it's very difficult for you as a seminary or divinity school to remain open. And so I think in some ways there is no traditional path for any students going through seminary or divinity school right now. They're going to have to reimagine their future anew. But for secular students, I would just say the opportunity is huge, because you can bring secular ideas into any sphere. If you have any inclination to be a journalist or be a physician or be a filmmaker, think about how you do that with you lead with your secular values. Even if you're not leading a secular humanist community, you're still leading a humanist community, a secular community, right, of humans. And that's important. So I think we're gonna have to start thinking about integration. And in some ways, I think the model here, not that we can all do this, but a model for us is Oprah. to me, oh, to me, growing up, Billy Graham was the religious leader of the United States. Why? Because he was the most prominent Protestant in a majority Protestant country, right? But now we're no longer a majority Protestant country. We're actually going to be mostly unaffiliated soon. And that's not going to change. That's the trajectory that we're never going to go back. And so I think when Billy Graham died, he passed that mantle to Oprah Winfrey, who became the spiritual leader of a spiritual but not religious country. And the reason why Oprah has legitimacy is because she's not part of any faith tradition. She's not part of any denomination. She doesn't wear the traditional garb of religious cleric. She doesn't come out of a seminary or a divinity school. And so she can talk about these human issues in ways that religious leaders have historically talked about them, but to a much larger audience. It doesn't matter if you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist, what Oprah says is going to resonate with you just because you're a human being. And so I think that is the new model of religious leadership. She's a spiritual leader, but she's also a journalist and a content creator. And she uses her role as a journalist and a content creator to lead spiritually, as opposed to being a spiritual leader of a spiritual community in a traditional denominational context.
Yeah, so it's almost like, any career or any academic path that you take that could lead you to a potential career or variety of different careers needs this sort of ethical, philosophical, spiritual, if you will, component to it. And I think that's one of the things that my involvement with the students at USC certainly focuses on. And I know certainly Bart Campolo before me, it was like, okay, so you want to be, a lawyer, but don't just be a lawyer, like be a lawyer who has this sense of the world that's more than just this narrow sort of self-interest, but this broader interest in the planet and in all of humanity. I guess maybe that brings me sort of to my last question that I have, and as a non-theist myself, and I guess what I mean by non-theist in this specific question is I don't have a belief that someone or something is going to save us from ourselves or from collapse or disaster or whatever. I mean, it's entirely up to our choices as human beings. And I know a lot of religious people think that too. They don't have a view of God that believe that God's going to just kind of, wave his magic wand and everything's going to be fine. And I've been struggling with whether or not I think we humans are doing well in this crisis. Like I don't know how, I'm not sure how to evaluate how we're doing. And I guess it's not up to me to decide that anyway, but my brain goes there nonetheless. I thought, for instance, that anti-vax would sort of die out as everybody would be desperate to get the vaccine that will save their life. But instead, we see almost the opposite, right? That or maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like I've read recently some stories that anti-vaxxers are just gearing up and they're already making arguments against vaccine that hasn't even been created yet. Or people that are flaunting their so-called freedom to not wear a mask and infect other people, or, defying collective, community requirements to protect one another. And then I also hear that those stories, get more traction in the media, and maybe those are small stories that are getting blown out of proportion. So then I wonder, like, maybe we are doing better than it seems like by listening to the news. So, I mean, how do you feel about us people? Are we going to make it? Are we going to pull together, or are we doomed?
Well, I think in some ways, this is a dress rehearsal for catastrophic climate change. Our students' lives are going to be serious. We'll get past COVID. We're going to get past it in 16 months, but we're not going to get past catastrophic climate change. And what we're seeing with COVID, the amplification of inequities across socioeconomic and racial sort of lines, the movement or lack of movement that people are going to be able to have or not have, people who are displaced, people who lose their livelihoods, like this is what's coming too. So in some ways, this is a way for us to develop the kinds of resiliency and for young people to to think about a much larger post-COVID reality where many of these challenges will come just because of the changing climate. What gives and are we doing well? Who knows? I think some are doing well, some aren't. Some states are doing better, some countries are doing better, some people are doing better. Some days I do okay, some days I don't. Some moments I do okay, some moments I don't. But I think where I find some hope is that there's never actually been a serious conversation, at least in the United States and really not anywhere in the world, of let's just let people die and not do anything at all because of the economic disruption. We have completely obliterated the economy, and yet there hasn't really been that strong of a counter argument of actually money is more important than life. We've obliterated the economy because we still have a belief that life is more important than money, that people are more important than products, that love is more important and care is more important than fear. And I guess that has made me feel good. There are the outliers who are like, no, let's just go for it. But that's not the predominant perspective for either Republicans or Democrats, progressives or conservatives, young people or old people. 70% of Californians want to extend the stay-at-home order, even though it's economically disruptive. It's not good for their mental health. Why? Because they still care about people they don't know about. And that to me gives me hope.
That's beautiful. I hoped you would take us there, because I know that's what I need to hear right now.
Yeah.
And I know that if you're anything like me, you do a little bit of self-talk like that too. Like, as you're telling other people, I'm sure you're telling yourself as well. But thanks, Varun. Appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate you, man. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Ryan, thank you for your leadership. It's more important now than ever. Thank you.